The Silent Phone Matrix. 12 mindset shifts to stop surviving and start magnetizing. Most individuals do not fear a life without romance, rather. They dread the prospect of being left alone with their own minds. This hidden anxiety drives them to plunge headfirst into unstable unions, accept emotional neglect, overlook blatant red flags, and accept crumbs of affectional in a desperate attempt to drown out the quiet. Yet, ancient spiritual wisdom offers a radical perspective. It reveals that clinging to others is the true source of heartbreak, and that the restless urge to find a partner to complete your existence only keeps your spirit in turmoil. Choosing the unmarried path is not entering a void, it is the creation of sacred space. It is room to expand, room to mend, and room to discover your authentic identity away from the noise of the world. When embraced with intention, this chapter of your life becomes your most resilient foundation. Our focus today is not the pursuit of romance, but an exploration of why embracing solitude could be the most transformative spiritual awakening you ever experience. 1. Loneliness compels you to confront your authentic self. When your life is continuously occupied by romantic pursuits, your sense of self subtly blends into the desires, temperaments, reactions, and expectations of another human being. Imperceptibly, you begin altering your behavior to preserve the bond. You select words carefully to evade arguments, suppress personal convictions to avoid friction, mask your vulnerabilities to shield yourself from judgment, and sacrifice core traits just to sustain a superficial peace. Over a long period, you might completely lose sight of how drastically your character has been modeled by another person's presence. However, when you walk alone, that external mirror vanishes entirely. There is no companion to immediately validate your feelings, no constant distraction to rescue you from uncomfortable truths, and no voice to reassure you during moments of self-doubt. Suddenly, you are forced to coexist with your own consciousness. You awaken to the sound of your own thoughts echoing through an empty room. You look at a phone that no longer lights up with endless notifications. You feel the raw gravity of your emotions without a partner rushing in to pacify your distress. Initially, this stillness can feel incredibly oppressive, as though a vital piece of you is absent. The human mind, deeply habituated to external stimulation and romantic assurance, grows agitated. You might encounter waves of boredom, isolation, or profound restlessness. Yet, this internal friction does not indicate that your life is failing. It signifies that you are finally encountering your true self stripped of all illusions. Spiritual wisdom asserts that clear vision is the absolute threshold of freedom. You cannot heal a wound you refuse to look at, nor can you evolve beyond a reality you constantly run away from. Embracing the single life provides an extraordinary, uninterrupted window to look into your internal world with absolute clarity. You begin to map the architecture of your thoughts. You start to notice how frequently you rely on outside validation, and how rapidly insecurity surfaces when left without praise. Rather than pointing fingers at a partner for your emotional fluctuations, you step up and claim full ownership of your psychological state. Through this process, you may realize that your deep-seated loneliness isn't caused by the lack of a relationship, but by buried psychological fractures within. Perhaps you never learned the art of peaceful self-coexistence. Perhaps you were conditioned to believe that outside affection is the sole benchmark of your human worth. Or perhaps you weaponized romance as a shield to escape profound anxieties regarding rejection, isolation, or inadequacy. Walking alone gently unearths these subterranean layers, casting light into the neglected chambers of your mind where old trauma has settled. This confrontation is not designed to breed self-loathing. Its sole purpose is to fortify your spirit. The moment you begin to map these internal behaviors with gentle curiosity rather than harsh condemnation, a profound shift takes place. Your self-comprehension deepens. You map out your emotional triggers and discover what genuinely brings tranquility to your soul, rather than settling for fleeting escapes. Instead of seeking an external savior to alleviate your discomfort, you master the art of self-comfort. Instead of pleading for applause, you cultivate genuine self-respect. Instead of fleeing from painful emotions, you sit with them quietly, watching them form, peak, and dissolve like tides in the ocean. This discipline builds true psychological maturity, emotional resilience, and an unshakable sense of self-reliance that no romantic partner could ever grant you. The vast majority of people spend their entire lives dodging this internal mirror. They hop restlessly from one partner to the next, eternally seeking an outsider to patch up an internal void they refuse to examine. They mistake temporary distraction for genuine healing, and casual attention for meaningful connection. But stepping away from romance blocks those escape routes, beckoning you to transform through a process that is undeniably painful yet profoundly liberating. When you truly see yourself for who you are, you realize you were never fundamentally broken. You are simply a human being navigating your evolution. You begin to forgive your history, appreciate your inner power, and recognize that you possess far more strength than you ever gave yourself credit for. Living single is not a sentence to isolation, it is an expedition of self-realization. It is about forging the inner strength to exist in quietude and still recognize your own completeness. It is about discovering who you are when there is no audience to applaud, critique, or define you. And once you find true comfort in your own existence, the terror of isolation dissolves. You no longer hand over the keys of your identity to an outsider. In this light, solitude reveals itself as your most profound guide, stripping away false realities, purging distractions, and steering you toward the most pivotal alliance of your existence, the relationship you maintain with yourself. 2. You distinguish genuine connection from mere emotional dependency. Many individuals move through life convinced they are searching for romance, when in reality, they are merely seeking a drug to numb their pain. They are chasing a temporary reprieve from isolation, an escape from insecurity, and a shield against the quiet, haunting terror that they are inadequate on their own. They crave an emotional anchor to validate their existence and prove that they matter to the world. They demand guarantees against abandonment and nonstop evidence that they are chosen above all others. While these cravings are deeply human, spiritual clarity reveals that whenever we use another person as a shield against our inner fears, love degrades into toxic attachment. Attachment and love are entirely separate states of being. Attachment operates from a place of scarcity, declaring "I need you in order to survive." True love speaks from a position of security, stating, "I choose to share my life with you, but I am already complete on my own." Attachment is fueled by underlying anxiety. It lives in constant terror of abandonment, overanalyzes minor shifts in a partner's tone, panics when a text response is delayed, and seeks to dominate and control out of a fear of the unknown. Conversely, authentic love stems from an inner equilibrium. It does not suffocate. It does not demand ceaseless validation. It does not spiral into panic during moments of physical or emotional space. It simply trusts. When you intentionally step away from the dating world, the boundary between these two states becomes starkly visible. Without an emotional crutch to lean on, you begin to observe how frequently you have mistaken basic comfort for genuine spiritual connection. You may look back and realize that you didn't actually miss the person from your past. You merely missed the ego boost of being desired. You might recognize that the profound ache of a breakup wasn't the loss of love itself, but the sudden withdrawal of validation. This realization isn't meant to cause shame, it is meant to catalyze your emotional growth. Spiritual laws dictate that clinging to things inevitably breeds misery, because everything in this physical reality is subject to change. Human beings alter, emotions shift, and life circumstances pivot. If your psychological stability is entirely hostage to the physical presence of another person, your peace of mind will forever remain highly volatile. Stepping into singleness offers you the sacred sanctuary required to reconstruct your emotional infrastructure from the ground up. You begin to learn how to quiet your own anxious mind rather than expecting a romantic partner to fix it for you. You step into the practice of self-soothing rather than frantically seeking an external distraction. Granted, this transitional phase can feel intensely challenging. Your mind will naturally crave attention, romanticize highly flawed past relationships, and whisper the lie that you are half a person without someone sleeping beside you. However, if you can stand as an objective witness to these thoughts without immediately succumbing to them, a remarkable transformation unfolds. You begin to see that the urge to reach out is merely a passing sensation, not an absolute directive. You realize that longing is simply an emotional wave that rises and falls like any other. And through that observation, you reclaim your personal power. Over time, an entirely new level of internal strength takes root. You begin to genuinely appreciate your own company without a trace of restlessness. You welcome connection when it manifests, but your world does not shatter when it recedes. You formulate a radically healthier definition of romance. Instead of entering the world asking, "Who can fill my gaps?" you start asking, "Am I rooted in my own wholeness?" Instead of hunting for a human savior to banish your demons, you do the quiet, courageous work of dissolving those fears independently. This shift alters every dynamic of your life. When you stop approaching potential partners from a place of desperate emptiness, your personal standards naturally skyrocket. You instantly stop chasing emotionally unavailable people. You refuse to tolerate half-hearted efforts or manipulative mind games, and you no longer shrink your personality just to keep someone interested. You come to understand that authentic love will never require you to compromise your mental peace. It will amplify it. Solitude teaches you that a relationship should be a beautiful bonus to an already fulfilling life, not the life support system for your identity. It proves that the most resilient bonds are forged when two self-sufficient individuals unite not out of mutual desperation, but out of profound respect and shared completeness. When you approach love from this state of abundance, you abandon the need to possess, suffocate, or control. You honor the connection without being paralyzed by the fear of its eventual end. This is the definition of spiritual maturity. This is true emotional liberation. And that is precisely why taking the time to master the difference between toxic attachment and true love is never wasted. Time it is the vital preparation for a connection that is infinitely deeper, calmer, and more authentic than anything born out of fear. 3. Your energy is redirected toward personal mastery rather than romantic chaos. When you are deeply enmeshed in a romantic relationship, an immense percentage of your psychological and emotional currency is continuously directed outward. Your mind is constantly occupied by your partner's emotional state, decoding their behavioral shifts, realigning your personal schedule, and burning hours on communication, joint planning, compromises, and unavoidable friction. Even within the context of an incredibly healthy partnership, there is a non-stop, demanding expenditure of emotional focus. There is nothing inherently wrong with this investment, but it undeniably requires massive amounts of energy. And most people completely underestimate how much of their personal power is drained by these daily relationship dynamics. When you return to the single state, that entire reservoir of energy is funneled back into your own being. It no longer needs to be fractured, divided, or constantly calibrated around the shifting moods and expectations of another person. For the first time in perhaps years, your emotional capital is entirely yours to invest in your own evolution. This redirection of focus carries immense spiritual potency. True wisdom teaches that self-mastery is the ultimate path to a peaceful life. Self-mastery demands that you intimately understand the workings of your mind, discipline your daily habits, and heighten your conscious awareness. However, this level of personal evolution cannot occur without uninterrupted focus, dedicated space, and profound silence. Walking single provides exactly that sanctuary. Instead of burning precious hours over analyzing text messages or fixing relationship issues, you can invest that exact same time into understanding your own subconscious programming. Instead of exhausting your energy trying to maintain an artificial harmony with a partner, you can dedicate your power to constructing an unbreakable harmony within your own chest. You can design physical routines that fortify your body, cultivate fierce discipline within your professional life, and dive deep into your creative passions without a single shred of guilt or external distraction. You are free to map out a vision for your future that aligns exclusively with your core soul values, rather than bending your destiny to accommodate someone else's trajectory. It is tragic how many people completely minimize their grandest ambitions just to remain palatable within a relationship. They shelf their deepest dreams, delay vital personal ventures, and silence their authentic voices simply to keep the peace. But when you are unattached, you can expand to your absolute limits. You can take massive risks, radically shift your life path, and evolve at your own speed without ever having to negotiate your transformation with an outsider. This chapter of life allows you to view your daily habits through an unfiltered lens. You discover exactly how you manage your time when there is no audience to perform for. You see the true reality of your self-discipline when there is no one around to impress. And you uncover what genuinely brings fulfillment to your life when you drop the need to please a partner. This level of honesty builds absolute authenticity. You begin to design a life that is a direct mirror of your true essence, rather than a performance curated for public approval. Furthermore, this focused energy yields a massive neurological benefit. When your mind is no longer caught in a loop of reacting to another person's chaotic emotional states, your nervous system finally enters a state of deep rest. You are no longer subjected to the exhausting roller coaster of relationship highs and lows. Instead, you begin to anchor yourself in a steady, unshakable peace. This internal stability supercharges your self-worth because it serves as undeniable proof that your emotional equilibrium is entirely self-generated. As the days pass, your self-trust becomes absolute. You trust your cognitive choices. You trust your intuition. And you trust your innate ability to navigate the complexities of existence completely on your own. This trust is liberating because it completely neutralizes any anxiety regarding what lies ahead. You lose all terror of the future because you have already constructed a reality that is deeply rich, joyful, and purposeful all by itself. Solitude also grants you the mental bandwidth to define your higher purpose with absolute precision, free from the static of emotional turbulence. Your intellect sharpens. You begin to ponder the weightier questions of your life. What legacy do I want to leave? What are my non-negotiable principles? What truly matters to my spirit once romantic validation is removed from the equation? This level of clarity is incredibly rare. The masses continuously leap from one connection to the next, never pausing long enough to figure out who they are outside of a partnership. But when you step into the single life with deliberate intent, you carve out the psychological terrain necessary to build an independent, immovable foundation. And this is the ultimate spiritual truth. When you utilize your single years to cultivate your mind, you transform into a human being who is fundamentally incapable of approaching love from a place of starvation. You step into the world from a position of absolute overflow, offering stability rather than begging for it. Your energy becomes deliberate. Your evolution becomes unstoppable, and your peace becomes an internal fortress rather than a conditional luxury. This is why being single is never a period of stagnation. It is a time of fierce internal compounding. It is the quiet crucible where the most powerful version of you is forged, away from the spotlight, away from distraction, and completely free from emotional chaos. 4. You dismantle the terror of loneliness and step into the power of solitude. Buried deep within the shadow side of the human psyche lies a fear that often overrides the fear of failure, rejection, or even physical death. The terror of absolute isolation. The prospect of sitting in a profoundly quiet room, stripped of all noise, left with nothing but the unedited echo of one's own thoughts, can feel completely intolerable to most. It is precisely this subterranean panic that coerces individuals to stay trapped in toxic, draining relationships, anchors them to connections that systematically erode their peace of mind, and convinces them that toxic company is infinitely superior to an empty bed. Yet, spiritual truths remind us that suffering escalates the more we resist reality. If you treat being alone as an enemy to be avoided at all costs, you condemn yourself to a perpetual state of inner poverty. When you deliberately choose to remain single, you aren't merely taking a break from dating. You are marching straight toward the very monster the rest of humanity spends their entire lives fleeing from. You are making a conscious decision to inhabit the silence, rather than masking it with casual company. You are daring to experience your own existence without an escape route. Admittedly, the initial phase of this experiment can feel incredibly jarring. The untrained mind will naturally panic, frantically searching for external noise, looping painful memories on repeat, obsessing over historical what-ifs, and screaming that your life is fundamentally broken without a partner. But if you can stand firm as an objective observer of this internal panic, you will unlock a monumental truth. The discomfort is not permanent. It builds like a wave, reaches a frantic peak, and then inevitably dissolves into nothingness. The mind's primal terror of isolation completely loses its grip the moment you stop running from it. You come to realize that loneliness is not your permanent identity. It is merely a passing weather pattern, moving through the vast sky of your consciousness. Spiritual philosophy teaches that impermanence governs all emotional states, including the ache of isolation. The moment you sit quietly with solitude rather than fighting it, the experience undergoes a magical transfiguration. It reveals its hidden medicine. You realize that existing independently does not mean you are unlovable, cast aside, or broken. It simply means you have entered a pristine space where you can finally realign with your own spirit without external interference. Slowly but surely, solitude transforms from a terrifying prison into an empowering fortress. You begin to find deep joy in the simplest unshared moments of life. You can wander through a park and feel intensely connected to the present moment, rather than haunted by a void. You can sit in a quiet room and feel deeply reflective rather than anxious. You can look at an entirely open weekend and see a canvas of infinite freedom, rather than a sentence to isolation. This shift is quiet, but it represents an absolute revolution in your psychology. The moment you conquer the fear of being alone, you break the heaviest emotional chains holding you hostage. Think of the power this grants you. No one can ever manipulate you by threatening to walk away. No one can control your behavior by dangling attention in front of you and then cruelly snatching it away. You are no longer trapped in the humiliating position of tolerating disrespect just to avoid a quiet house. This is the very definition of emotional sovereignty. It is critical to understand that painful isolation and profound solitude are completely different states of being. Isolation is the agonizing sensation of forced exclusion. Solitude is the joyful embrace of self-chosen freedom. When you intentionally choose the single path, you are choosing solitude as your master teacher. You are learning the high art of feeling entirely content within your own skin. You are building the capacity to look at your darkest thoughts without spiraling into a panic, and you are consolidating your internal foundation. As time marches on, something extraordinary happens. The silence that once felt like a heavy weight begins to feel incredibly spacious. You start to hear the quiet whisper of your own intuition with crystal clarity, no longer drowned out by the static of a partner's dramas. You begin to understand your emotional architecture instead of burying your feelings under relationship distractions, becoming intensely aware of your triggers and deeply patient with your unique healing timeline. This internal growth fosters a rare brand of confidence, not the obnoxious, fragile kind that demands attention, but a quiet, rock-solid security that remains completely unshakable when no one is watching. You realize with absolute certainty that your joy does not evaporate when you are alone. Your human value does not drop 1 millimeter in the absence of a partner, and your life remains profoundly meaningful even in total stillness. And this is the ultimate truth. The day you conquer the fear of loneliness, you fundamentally alter how you approach romance for the rest of your life. You will never again enter a relationship out of a panicked need for survival. You will refuse to rush into commitments simply to avoid your own company. You transform from a desperate seeker into an elite curator of your space. You begin to value your internal peace infinitely more than mere superficial companionship. You choose love exclusively because it elevates an already beautiful life, not because you need an outsider to rescue you from your internal emptiness. Solitude is the ultimate training ground where this shift occurs. It is the place where you realize that being alone is not your enemy, but your most loyal ally. It teaches you how to bend without breaking, how to stand on your own 2 feet, and how to realize that your presence alone is an absolute empire. When you can exist in a perfectly silent room and feel a deep sense of calm instead of a creeping anxiety, you have won the ultimate war within the human mind. And once that fear loses its dominion over your choices, your entire existence becomes infinitely lighter. You stop chasing the chaotic noise of the world, you drop your terror of the quiet, and you step into an unshakable peace with the being in the mirror. 5. You forge an internal source of validation instead of surviving on external praise. One of the most insidious, unacknowledged addictions holding the human heart captive is the desperate craving to feel chosen. Most people will never have the courage to admit this out loud, but they evaluate their personal worth entirely through the lens of external attention. If they are desired, they feel valuable if they receive compliments. They feel confident if someone selects them as a romantic partner. They feel important. Consequently, the absolute moment that external attention begins to wane or abruptly vanishes, their entire sense of self-worth completely implodes. This is not a sign of fundamental weakness, it is the result of deep societal conditioning. From our earliest days, we are fed the narrative that outside love is the only definitive proof of our human significance. Yet, spiritual clarity reminds us that anything outside of ourselves is inherently unstable. If your sense of value is entirely hostage to another person's approval, your internal peace will forever remain incredibly fragile. When you commit to walking alone for an extended season, this fragile illusion is shattered. There is no partner around to offer daily compliments, no constant reassurance that you are desired, and no external voice validating your appearance, intellect, or charm. Initially, this lack of feedback can feel incredibly disorienting. Your ego will spiral into a wave of self-doubt, whispering questions like, "Am I simply not enough?" It will tempt you to compare your life to those who seem adored and envied, frantically hunting for evidence that you are somehow defective. But if you can remain firmly anchored in the present moment, instead of reacting to these insecure thoughts, a beautiful shift occurs. You begin to realize a foundational truth. Your worth as a human being has never been contingent on someone else selecting you. You come to see that attention and value are completely unrelated concepts. Countless individuals are showered with superficial attention, yet remain completely empty. Inside, millions are fiercely desired yet live in crippling insecurity. Outside validation is nothing more than a temporary ego boost. It is entirely incapable of constructing an enduring house of peace. Walking single hands you the keys to develop an entirely different caliber of confidence. Instead of constantly scanning the room wondering, "Who will accept me?" you begin to look inward and ask, "Do I accept myself?" Instead of exhausting your energy trying to perform for an audience, you redirect your entire focus toward living in total alignment with your highest values. You start making life choices not to win applause, but to protect your self-respect. This psychological pivot is completely transformative. When you exist on a diet of external approval, you are forced to continuously manipulate your personality to fit the expectations of others. You tone down your authentic traits, hide your true opinions, and perform acts designed to secure attention rather than express your genuine essence. But the moment you anchor your validation internally, the need to perform completely evaporates. You become intensely comfortable existing in your raw authenticity, completely unbothered if the masses fail to comprehend who you are. True wisdom states that being dependent on praise and terrified of criticism are twin traps that keep the mind in perpetual torment. If your joy skyrockets with a compliment and plunges with a rejection, you have effectively handed over control of your emotional life to the world around you. Being single creates the necessary boundary to break free from this exhausting cycle. You begin to track how frequently you fish for reassurance, observing exactly how praise inflates your ego and how silence triggers your insecurity. And instead of beating yourself up over these patterns, you simply bring conscious awareness to them. This objective awareness gradually transmutes your insecurity into a rock-solid internal stability. You master the art of validating your own efforts, taking deep pride in your private progress even if no one is around to applaud it. You recognize your inherent strengths without needing an outsider to point them out to you, quietly building an unshakable self-reverence. Over time, this internal validation constructs a bulletproof sense of grounding. Rejection ceases to feel like a lethal attack on your identity. It is recontextualized as a simple mismatch in personal preference. Silence from the world no longer reads as proof of your inadequacy, it is embraced as peaceful space. You completely stop chasing people who fail to see your worth because you already see it clearly yourself. This brand of confidence is profoundly quiet. It has absolutely no need to shout, prove its worth, or demand the spotlight. It rests peacefully within your own bones. And the deeper you construct this internal reservoir, the less desperate you become for outside reassurance. When you eventually decide to invite a relationship into your life from this state of self-sufficiency, the entire dynamic alters. You no longer demand constant compliments to keep your anxiety at bay. You don't panic over minor shifts in your partner's behavior. And you will instantly walk away from disrespect because you are no longer terrified of a quiet house. You know your price independent of their affection. Solitude is the sacred laboratory where this internal foundation is built. It is the time where you learn that your life possesses immense cosmic meaning, even when there is no one around to witness it. It is where you discover that quiet self-respect is infinitely more powerful than the loudest public applause, and that true confidence is built in the dark, not under the spotlight. Once you truly internalize your own value, it becomes entirely untouchable. No amount of cold rejection, physical distance, or societal comparison can ever take it away from you. Your validation becomes an internal, permanent anchor, steady, unyielding, and completely unshakable. 6. You begin to manifest relationships from a state of overflow instead of desperation. There is an invisible, absolute law of human existence that many completely fail to perceive. The precise frequency of your internal world dictates the exact quality of what you manifest in your physical reality. Your relationships are never random, chaotic accidents. They are direct, uncensored mirrors of your current emotional condition, your level of self-reverence, and your hidden beliefs about what you deserve. When you are operating from a deep sense of internal lack, you will unconsciously hunt for a partner to patch up that emptiness. When you live in insecurity, you will naturally manifest companions who exploit that vulnerability. When you doubt your own human value, you will inevitably tolerate treatment that validates that doubt. This is not cosmic punishment. It is simply a reflection. Spiritual laws remind us that the outer world is merely a mirror of the mind. If your consciousness is locked in a state of frantic craving and lack, it will inevitably pull in attachments that mirror that exact turmoil. But if your mind is deeply anchored, self-aware, and at peace, it will naturally gravitate toward relationships defined by absolute stability. When you deliberately choose to pause your dating life, you throw a wrench into the toxic cycle of entering relationships out of desperation. You stop running into the arms of the first person who shows interest just to escape a lonely night. You stop accepting crumbs of attention just because your soul is starving. Instead, you begin to look inward and ask the heavy questions. What do I actually need to thrive, and what caliber of character do I truly deserve? During this intentional pause, you begin to heal the fractured parts of your psyche that once convinced you that you were unworthy of real love. You perform a fearless autopsy on your relationship history, looking closely at the behavioral archetypes you used to chase. You may open your eyes to the painful truth that you accepted toxic treatment in the past, simply because you were terrified of sleeping alone. You might see that you confused dramatic, volatile chemistry with genuine spiritual compatibility, or that you were merely chasing the ego boost of validation rather than a soulful connection. This breakthrough completely updates your emotional standards, not from an arrogant, defensive posture, but from a position of absolute, grounded self-worth. Your non-negotiables naturally elevate as your self-respect solidifies. You begin to value consistent internal peace, infinitely more than cheap, temporary excitement, and you prioritize emotional safety over reckless, volatile passion. You spot red flags instantly because your vision is no longer blurred by the desperate need to make things work. When you feel fundamentally whole within your own skin, your decision-making process slows down and becomes incredibly calm. You are no longer operating on a ticking clock. You don't spiral into a panic at the thought of waiting for the right fit. You refuse to chase someone simply because they throw a few compliments your way. Instead, you quietly observe their character. You watch how they navigate conflict. You track how they treat those who can do nothing for them. And you move with deliberate slow-motion clarity, guided by wisdom rather than desperation. Walking single grants you the luxury to build this clear-sightedness free from outside pressure. You master the art of orchestrating a deeply fulfilling life completely on your own terms. You craft daily routines that make you incredibly proud of the person you are becoming, and you cultivate emotional equilibrium. You forge an unbreakable bond with your own consciousness, and as this internal castle of stability grows, a profound shift takes place. You completely stop looking for a human being to complete your story, because you realize your story is already a masterpiece all by itself. When you choose to enter the romantic arena from this state of absolute wholeness, the entire experience changes. It feels weightless, light, and beautiful. It ceases to feel like an anxious battle for survival or a codependent addiction. It transforms into an act of mutual sharing. You are no longer looking for a savior to pull you out of the quicksand, nor are you begging a partner to fix your internal loneliness. Instead, you are offering high-vibrational companionship from a position of absolute internal overflow. True wisdom states that all toxic attachment stems from desperate craving. But when you root out that craving from your spirit, love is finally given the pristine environment it requires to manifest naturally. It arrives without requiring you to force it, without triggering crippling anxiety, and without the toxic urge to manipulate or control the timeline. This is the difference between love born of lack and love born of abundance. Emptiness cries out, "I need you to fix my life." Wholeness speaks from power. "I am already thriving in my own sovereignty, and I welcome you to walk this beautiful path beside me." One path leads to anxiety, while the other anchors you in peace. Taking the time to stay single until you achieve internal wholeness completely alters the trajectory of your romantic future. It acts as an elite filter that purges chaos, removes urgency, and replaces frantic desperation with sharp discernment. You begin to select partners who genuinely align with your grandest values, rather than settling for someone who merely fills a temporary emotional void. And even if your ideal partner doesn't manifest immediately, you never feel incomplete in their absence. Your daily joy is no longer hostage to their arrival. You remain intensely patient, deeply grounded, and entirely trusting of your life's timing because you have mastered your own mind. Singleness is the sacred womb where your emotional baseline is elevated. It is where you learn that love should be a beautiful expansion of your world, not a compensation for an internal void. It is where you discover that the ultimate law of attraction begins with radical self-reverence. When you are whole, your choices are wise. When you are at peace within, love transforms from an addictive necessity into an elegant gift. 8. You forge a bulletproof internal alliance that no external force can fracture. There is one single relationship in your entire existence that is absolutely guaranteed to begin with your very first breath and endure until your absolute last. The profound connection you maintain with your own consciousness. Every single thought that crosses your mind, every emotion that floods your chest, and every life-altering choice you make must pass through this internal filter. Yet, the vast majority of humanity completely ignores this relationship. They burn their finite time, focus, and energy nurturing romantic ties, chasing casual friendships, and begging for social acceptance, while completely neglecting the bond they hold within their own skin. Walking single hands you the rare, extraordinary opportunity to construct a sacred, bulletproof alliance with your own Sula connection that no outsider can ever manipulate, compromise, or destroy. When your life is a non-stop loop of serial relationships, your internal dialogue inevitably becomes contaminated by external voices. You begin to view your own value through the highly subjective lens of someone else's opinion. If they shower you with praise, your self-esteem skyrockets. If they critique your flaws, you feel completely worthless. Over time, your self-image becomes incredibly fragile because it is entirely hostage to the fluctuating emotions of an outsider. But when you make the conscious choice to stand alone, you systematically break free from that toxic dependency. You begin to hear your own authentic voice rising above the noise of the world. Admittedly, during the initial phase of this stillness, that internal voice might be incredibly harsh. It may loop old criticisms, remind you of historical failures, and attempt to compare you to those who seem further ahead. However, instead of running away from this internal storm by diving back into the dating apps, you choose to stand your ground and engage with your mind consciously. True awareness teaches us that observing the mind is the absolute genesis of liberation. The moment you step back and view your thoughts as an objective witness rather than blindly believing them, you create a powerful psychological boundary between your true identity and your passing insecurities. This practice is deeply transformative. You begin to cross-examine your negative self-talk, demanding to know if the harsh judgments you carry are based on objective truth or old, borrowed programming. You start to replace brutal self-flagellation with deep, unyielding patience. Instead of punishing yourself for your human flaws, you bring understanding to your journey. Instead of demanding overnight perfection, you accept that evolution is a gradual process. This psychological pivot constructs an unbreakable sense of emotional safety within your own chest. Emotional security is something the masses frantically seek from others. They long for a human savior to make them feel safe, valued, and deeply understood. But true, unshakable security can only ever be generated from within. When you build a fiercely loyal alliance with yourself, you are no longer locked in a civil war with your own mind. You transform into your own ultimate source of reassurance. You calm your own anxieties, validate your own struggles, and back yourself up in the dark. Solitude provides the pristine environment required to master this internal partnership. You figure out exactly what calms your nervous system. You map out your specific psychological triggers, and you recognize precisely when you require deep rest rather than a cheap distraction. You take full responsibility for your stress levels instead of taking your frustration out on a partner, developing an elite level of emotional intelligence through the daily practice of objective self-observation. As this internal alliance solidifies, a monumental shift occurs. You learn to trust yourself implicitly. You trust your decisions because they are born of crystalline clarity rather than panic desperation. You trust your boundaries because they are carved out of absolute self-reverence. And you trust your intuition because you are no longer drowning it out with the constant static of relationship drama. This deep self-trust fosters a beautiful brand of independence, not the cold, cynical variety that aggressively pushes connection away, but a grounded, sovereign strength that simply refuses to collapse when left alone. You awaken to the liberating truth that even if a partner walks out of your life, you still remain fully intact with yourself. Even if your grandest romantic plans crumble into dust, your internal foundation remains absolutely unmoved. This realization completely neutralizes any anxiety regarding the future. Most people live in perpetual terror of breakups, not merely because they will miss the person, but because they fear their entire identity will dissolve in the aftermath. They feel abandoned not just by their partner, but by their own soul. But when you have taken the time to forge a sacred alliance with yourself first, you become completely unabandonable. Romance may arrive and recede, life circumstances may radically pivot, but your connection to your core remains absolute and unbroken. Furthermore, singleness allows you to discover the immense joy of your own company. You learn how to curate beautiful, independent experiences. You take yourself on long, meditative walks, map out your personal legacy, pursue creative interests purely for the joy of it, and design daily rituals that fiercely nourish your body and mind. Over time, what once felt like terrifying isolation transforms into an incredibly comforting sanctuary. This internal self-contentment radiates outward from your being, changing how you move through the world. You stop clinging to people out of a fear of the quiet. You refuse to overextend your energy just to buy temporary acceptance, and you engage with others from a place of raw authenticity rather than fragile insecurity. Paradoxically, this absolute self-sufficiency makes you infinitely more attractive to high-vibrational people because it signals true psychological stability. True non-attachment is not about eliminating love from your life. It is about entirely eliminating codependent survival tactics. When you hold an unbreakable alliance with your own soul, love transforms from a desperate race for survival into a beautiful, conscious choice. You can dive into a relationship with total freedom because you know with absolute certainty that your identity will never dissolve inside the bond. You can care for another human being with the entirety of your heart without ever fearing abandonment because you are already permanently anchored within your own sovereign being. 9. You strip away romantic illusions and perceive love with clear vision. One of the most monumental spiritual gifts of a prolonged single season is the systematic dismantling of your romantic illusions. When you are caught in a cycle of constantly chasing romantic connection, your mind naturally operates as a fantasy factory. It idealizes potential partners before they have even earned your trust, projects your deepest wishes onto their cold silence, invents grand destinies out of basic gestures, and mistakes standard physical attraction for cosmic fate. This does not happen because you are inherently foolish. It happens because desperate longing radically distorts human perception. When your soul is starving for connection, your mind will happily invent illusions to fill in the blanks. True wisdom warns us that the vast majority of human misery stems directly from these self-created illusions. The mind builds elaborate expectations, projecting a false reality onto things that simply do not exist in truth. We don't actually cling to people as they exist in raw reality. Rather, we cling fiercely to the flawless imaginary archetype we have projected onto them. We don't fall in love with the actual human being, we fall in love with a fantasy. And the absolute moment that reality inevitably shatters that illusion, we spiral into profound heartbreak. Walking single for an extended period grants you the objective distance required to break free from this matrix of illusion. It allows you to step back and perform a cold, honest autopsy on your history of idealization. You begin to see how rapidly you used to hand over your heart to an idealized potential rather than waiting for cold, hard truth. You recognize how frequently you consciously ignored blatant red flags simply because you wanted the fairy tale to continue, and how your underlying terror of isolation coerced you into accepting low-caliber clarity. This awakening does not transform you into a bitter, cynical person. It transforms you into a clear-sighted individual. There is a massive difference between cold cynicism and crystalline clarity. Cynicism is a defensive wall born of fear. Clarity is a clean lens born of wisdom. Clarity means you look at human beings exactly as they are, without inflating their virtues or diminishing their flaws. You no longer elevate highly flawed people onto unrealistic pedestals. You refuse to silence your inner intuition, and you never again confuse raw physical chemistry with genuine soul compatibility. You simply observe from a place of calm stability. The moment you detach from romantic illusions, your comprehension of love becomes unshakably grounded. You awaken to the reality that authentic love is not a perpetual state of frantic excitement, dramatic intensity, or obsessive infatuation. Those volatile states may feel incredibly powerful, but they are almost always driven by insecure craving. True wisdom teaches that frantic craving breeds toxic attachment, and attachment inevitably manufactures suffering. Real, high-vibrational love operates on an entirely different frequency. It feels remarkably steady, profoundly respectful, and deeply calm rather than chaotic. Solitude allows you the mental space to rewire your brain to appreciate this healthier frequency. Instead of chasing the unstable adrenaline of butterflies, you begin to prioritize an unshakable inner peace. Instead of hunting for a partner who sends your nervous system into an anxious tailspin, you seek a companion who stabilizes your mind. Instead of mistaking a volatile roller coaster of emotional highs and lows for true passion, you recognize quiet consistency as the ultimate sign of internal strength. This shift in perspective takes time. It demands that you sit in the quiet and review your past relationship choices with absolute honesty. You may come to realize that some of the connections you once romanticized as epic love stories were actually nothing more than toxic dynamics fueled by mutual insecurity. You might see that you weren't actually attached to the real human being beside you, but rather to the status of being loved. You may realize that you chose to look past massive incompatibilities simply because you were too exhausted by the prospect of starting over alone. While these realizations can be incredibly uncomfortable to face, they are profoundly liberating. They allow you to permanently drop the exhausting weight of unrealistic expectations, stopping you from demanding that a highly flawed human being act as your personal savior. They teach you to see people as beautifully human, rather than flawless gods. True mindfulness means seeing reality exactly as it unfolds, without adding or subtracting from the truth. When you practice this sharp mindfulness during your single chapter, your emotional intelligence skyrockets. You master the ability to distinguish immediate physical attraction from deep spiritual alignment. Attraction is instant, biological, and effortless alignment is an intricate tapestry woven from identical core values, deep mutual respect, and matched emotional maturity. Free from the societal pressure to secure a relationship status, you can take all the time you need to observe these dynamics play out in real time. You no longer rush to crown a casual date as the one within the first week. You stop building elaborate castles of the mind before a real foundation exists, and you remain fiercely anchored in objective reality. Dismantling these romantic illusions serves as the ultimate shield for your mental health. When you refuse to idealize people, you are fundamentally protected from being shattered by their human imperfections. You accept the reality that every human being carries a shadow side. That compatibility requires deliberate, daily effort from both parties, and you permanently stop expecting an outsider to resolve your internal psychological battles. Through this clarity, an even deeper spiritual awakening occurs. You realize that real love is never something you frantically hunt for in the outside world. It is something you diligently cultivate within your own chest. It begins with how you speak to, treat, and care for your own being. The moment you purge illusions from your consciousness, you stop demanding that another person hand you what you have failed to construct independently. You drop the delusion that your joy will magically unlock the moment a partner arrives instead. You build an empire of joy through daily mindfulness, fierce discipline, and absolute gratitude. You construct an unshakable stability within, and from that sovereign position, your entire perception of love shifts. You are no longer blinded by the fairy tale, you are guided by an ancient protective wisdom. Solitude is the ultimate training ground where this wisdom is refined. It is where you master the art of patience, practice razor-sharp discernment, and strengthen your ability to observe a situation without instantly attaching your emotions to it. As the months pass, your emotional reflexes slow down and become incredibly grounded. You stop falling into instant, blind infatuation, allowing the passage of time to unveil a person's true character. This quiet patience naturally screens out low-vibrational connections without you having to lift a finger. Emotionally inconsistent people immediately lose your interest. Individuals lacking core integrity become blindingly obvious to you in a flash. You don't treat them with harshness or malice. You are simply acutely aware. You hold yourself in such high regard that you would rather wait an eternity for true structural alignment than force a mismatched connection out of loneliness. Stripping away illusions doesn't mean your heart turns to stone or that you stop believing in the beauty of love. It means you choose to believe in it with your eyes wide open. You comprehend that a real partnership demands active work, raw communication, and constant personal evolution. You stop demanding that it function as an endless emotional high, accepting that true love is built through small, daily acts of consistency and identical values. When you see love through this pristine lens, you also lift an immense weight of unrealistic pressure off your own shoulders. You stop looking at your single status as some sort of personal failure or defect, and you completely stop comparing your relationship timeline to the world around you. You trust with absolute certainty that a connection of true magnitude cannot be rushed, and you ruthlessly prioritize the quality of the bond over the speed of its arrival. This clarity yields a profound, deep-seated peace. You are no longer chasing an imaginary mirage, you are living rooted in the truth. And reality, when fully accepted, is infinitely more stable than any beautiful illusion the mind could ever invent. 10. You align with your highest destiny. Instead of subordinating your life to another's trajectory, an extraordinary, unspoken revolution occurs the exact moment you make the conscious, sovereign choice to inhabit your singleness with absolute intent. Your entire life immediately stops revolving around the timing, temperaments, moods, and personal readiness of another human being. Your existence finally realigns with your own unique highest path of destiny. It is shocking to realize how many individuals completely rewrite their entire futures, dismantle their grandest ambitions, and distort their life plans simply to accommodate a romantic partner. They put their biggest dreams on ice, compromise their core professional values, alter their geographical paths, and actively mute their sharp intuition just to avoid disrupting a fragile relationship. But when you remain unattached long enough to truly meet the soul in the mirror, your life begins to expand exponentially. Your goals are no longer filtered through the highly subjective approval of an outsider. Your daily routines are no longer structured to manage someone else's emotional storm. Every single choice you make is born from a place of pure, unadulterated clarity rather than messy compromise. True wisdom teaches that attachment completely blindfolds our human discernment. When your mind is bound by toxic attachment, your life vision narrows down to a pinhole. You begin making monumental destiny choices out of a primal fear of loss, rather than from a position of cosmic alignment. You sentence yourself to live in cities that actively suffocate your growth. You tolerate career dynamics that minimize your intellect, and you actively downscale your true potential just to keep an insecure partner comfortable. This behavior is not born of innate weakness. It is the natural, devastating undertow of attachment. Stepping away from the dating loop completely destroys that undertow, handing you a vast, wide-open horizon. Free from the need to accommodate anyone else, you can finally ask yourself the heavy questions that matter to your evolution. What caliber of life do I want to build with my finite time on Earth? What level of savage self-discipline do I want to cultivate in my daily habits? What specific environments unleash the absolute highest version of my genius? These answers manifest with absolute clarity the moment you stop trying to coordinate your life path with an outsider's agenda. You begin to construct an empire built around raw personal growth rather than endless relationship maintenance. You find yourself waking up at dawn because you are genuinely hungry to build your dreams, not because a partner expects it of you. You invest deep resources into masterminds and learning because it sets your soul on fire, not to impress an audience. You take massive, audacious risks that align perfectly with your long-term purpose, completely refusing to play it safe just to protect a codependent bond. A quiet, terrifyingly powerful brand of confidence takes root during this period of focus. You realize with absolute certainty that your personal timeline does not need to validate society's frantic expectations. You understand that true human greatness cannot be rushed, and you begin to trust that your life operates in beautiful, divinely orchestrated seasons, and that this specific season of solitude is not an empty waiting room, but the vital, foundational bedrock of your legacy. It is tragic how many individuals build their entire existence on the fragile hope that a relationship will eventually come along and give them a purpose. They accept uninspiring careers simply because they offer basic stability for a family plan, or they change their geographical location to chase a partner, only to wake up a decade later feeling completely disconnected from their own souls. When you choose to stand single with deliberate intention, you radically flip this script. You build the architect first. You solidify your authentic identity, sharpen your professional skill sets, deepen your emotional intelligence, and master self-discipline. You learn how to flawlessly manage your time, master your financial independence, optimize your physical health, and protect your energy completely on your own. You create a life structure so structurally sound that it stands completely firm, even if a hurricane sweeps through your world. This is not a selfish act, it is the ultimate expression of personal responsibility. When you choose to step onto your highest timeline, you are showing ultimate reverence for your cosmic potential. You are honoring the version of you that exists beyond casual validation, and you are choosing relentless evolution over cheap, stagnant comfort. There is a profound spiritual alignment to this state of being. True clarity of mind always dictates immaculate, precise action. When your consciousness is no longer clouded by the frantic craving for romance, your decision-making becomes incredibly sharp. You can instantly sense when an opportunity is aligned with your soul, or when it is being forced out of fear. You trust your internal compass implicitly because it is no longer competing with the static of desperation. You begin to experience the sheer ecstasy of growing without an external weight holding you back. There is no frantic rush, no paralyzing fear that you are falling behind your peers, and absolutely no need to compare your unique journey to anyone else's path. You advance steadily, building your empire brick by brick with absolute patience, resting in the certainty that whatever is truly meant to walk beside you will naturally meet you at your exact level of evolution. This caliber of patience is a rare anomaly in a modern world obsessed with superficial, fast-paced dating and instant gratification. Choosing to wait for slow, immaculate alignment is a radical act of rebellion. It demands fierce discipline, unyielding faith, and the rare courage to sit in absolute solitude while the masses chase cheap, hollow distractions. But the ultimate reward is nothing short of breathtaking. You achieve absolute emotional sovereignty. Your daily happiness is no longer hostage to another human being's physical presence. Your internal equilibrium doesn't collapse when the spotlight of outside attention fades away. Your grandest life goals remain completely untouched, regardless of who enters your reality or who abruptly exits it. When love eventually manifests in your world, it encounters a human being who is already standing as an absolute colossus. You will never shrink your grandest ambitions to fit inside their comfort zone, nor will you stunt your personal evolution to maintain their security. Instead, you gracefully invite them to share in a life that is already blossoming in full color. This is the difference between building your existence around a relationship and inviting a relationship into a magnificent life you have already engineered. Solitude is the exclusive space where this massive realization is born. It teaches you that your path is sacred, proves that your personal evolution can never be compromised, and reminds you that you don't need a partner to arrive before you finally start living. Your life, you are already living it at maximum volume. 11. You master the art of sitting with intense desire without becoming a hostage to it. One of the most advanced spiritual milestones hidden within the single season has absolutely nothing to do with romance itself. It is the absolute mastery of raw human desire. It is about learning how to coexist with that deep, biological pull inside the chest that constantly whispers, "I want attention, I want physical touch, I want connection, I want a savior to choose me." Desire in its raw form is not an evil or defective trait. It is a fundamental aspect of the human experience. However, deep wisdom teaches that human misery never stems from desire itself, but from our toxic attachment to that desire. The exact moment that a healthy wanting mutates into a desperate, frantic needing, your internal peace instantly evaporates. When you are enclosed in a romantic partnership, this underlying desire is continuously medicated on a temporary basis. You receive consistent physical touch, regular validation, and effortless emotional proximity. But the moment you stand alone, desire is stripped of its medication and stands before you in its rawest form. You feel its gravity with absolute intensity because there is no immediate external escape route to numb it. You will inevitably find yourself craving deep physical intimacy during quiet nights, imagining romantic companionship when the house is silent, and watching your mind drift into elaborate fantasies of being held and adored. Initially, this internal fire can feel completely overwhelming. Your primitive brain will spiral into panic, attempting to convince you that your isolation is a definitive emergency. It will scream that this painful longing is absolute proof that you must immediately find a body to fill the void, creating an intense, frantic impatience. But if you can step into the fire of this longing, armed with absolute mindfulness, if you can simply sit and observe this intense energy without immediately reacting to it, something miraculous occurs. You begin to see that desire is nothing more than a passing wave of neurological energy moving through your body. It ignites, intensifies to a frantic peak, and then if you refuse to feed it with romantic fantasies or frantic panics, it gently and inevitably dissolves back into nothingness. This is the ultimate, gold standard spiritual training ground. The capacity to feel the full fire of human desire without allowing it to hijack your logic or dictate your behavior builds an elite tier of psychological strength. The vast majority of the population never achieves this mastery. They function as absolute slaves to their emotional impulses. The moment a wave of loneliness hits, they immediately open the dating apps, text a toxic ex-partner they know is poison for their peace, or run into a casual sexual encounter just to temporarily silence the internal discomfort of wanting. They mistake frantic neurological urgency for cosmic destiny. But when you remain single with fierce intention, You interrupt this reactionary loop. You step into the practice of restraint not from a place of toxic sexual suppression, but from a position of profound conscious awareness. You acknowledge the heavy longing in your chest. Without shaming your humanity, you sit with it, breathe through it, and firmly remind yourself that this desire does not define your identity, nor does it hold command over your actions. It is merely a temporary physiological state, not an absolute command. True non-attachment is emphasized because attachment acts as a pair of handcuffs for your destiny. When you are deeply attached to the desperate idea of being in love, you completely lose your capacity for rational thought. You look past critical incompatibilities, tolerate horrific emotional abuse, and actively dismantle your personal boundaries just to keep the drug flowing. But the moment you learn the art of sitting calmly with your desires, you instantly reclaim total sovereignty over your life choices. There is immense, terrifying power in being able to look at the world and say, yes, I deeply desire an elite love story, but I will absolutely refuse to chase it blindly out of starvation. That psychological shift alone represents the absolute peak of emotional maturity. It proves that you are not denying your human traits. You are simply refusing to let your biological impulses run your life. Over time, this fierce internal discipline bleeds into every other area of your character. If you can stand firm against the primal urge for romantic validation without collapsing into desperation, you can conquer any other addiction on earth. You can resist toxic habits with ease, master the art of delayed gratification, and ruthlessly choose long-term cosmic growth over short-term physical comfort. You transform from a fragile, reactive creature into a deeply intentional force of nature. This evolution constructs an unshakable stability within your nervous system. You are no longer a leaf blown around by every passing emotional breeze. You stop begging for an outsider to rescue you from your own internal discomfort. Because you have become comfortable existing in the tension, you comprehend that longing is a natural thread in the tapestry of the human experience. It does not mean your life is lacking. It simply means you are alive. Singleness transforms into your private spiritual gym where your consciousness is fortified daily. Every single wave of intense craving becomes a golden opportunity to flex your mindfulness. Every lonely night becomes a sacred test to strengthen your patience. Every panicked urge to rush into a connection becomes a chance to choose profound stillness. This discipline doesn't transform you into a cold, unfeeling robot. It centers you in your power. It doesn't kill your capacity for deep romance, it purifies it. Because when a partnership eventually manifests in your world, you will never cross the threshold out of emotional starvation. You will enter from a position of absolute clarity. You will instantly know the difference between raw biological desire and true structural compatibility. You will recognize when you are genuinely drawn to a soul out of divine alignment, rather than a frantic need to escape your own mind. Holding the power to pause, instead of blindly diving headfirst into an anxious attachment. This is the ultimate spiritual advantage hidden within the single life. It trains your entire nervous system to remain perfectly calm in the presence of intense longing, proving that you can survive the fire of desire without burning your life down in the process. 12. You step into absolute emotional sovereignty and permanently refuse to negotiate your peace. There is a transcendent tier of internal power that only a fraction of human beings ever attain in their lifetime, and it has absolutely nothing to do with physical domination, massive financial wealth, or societal status. It is the state of absolute emotional sovereignty. Emotional sovereignty means that your internal psychological state is fundamentally untouchable. It can no longer be dictated, manipulated, or altered by another human being's physical presence. Abrupt absence, casual approval, or cold rejection. It means your internal peace belongs entirely to you. It means your joy is no longer on a roller coaster that rises and falls based on how an outsider chooses to treat you. And there is no greater crucible to forge this unshakable power than choosing to remain single long enough to construct it with deliberate intent. When you are deeply enmeshed in a codependent relationship, your psychological equilibrium naturally hitches itself to your partner's behavioral patterns. If they treat you with warmth, you feel safe and secure. If they pull away into distance, Your anxiety spirals out of control if they offer praise. You feel valuable if they critique your flaws. You feel entirely insignificant. Over a long period, your internal stability becomes completely hostage to their consistency. This occurs not because you are fundamentally broken, but because attachment naturally fuses your emotional circuitry to another person's reality. But true peace can only ever be generated from within the core of your own being, never from outside conditions. The moment you rely on an outsider to regulate your internal world, you have effectively built your house on shifting sand. Human beings change their minds, life circumstances pivot, and emotions fluctuate wildly. If your mental peace is hostage to something that is inherently unstable, your life will forever feel fragile. Stepping into the single life completely breaks this toxic dependency. It cuts off the constant, exhausting emotional static and removes the daily highs and lows tied to an outsider's behavior. In that newfound stillness, you begin to construct a rare psychological muscle: true self-regulation. Self-regulation means you possess the elite capability to soothe your own anxious nervous system without needing a text back. It means you can experience heavy sadness without dropping into a panic, navigate bitter disappointment without losing your core identity, and feel intense longing without acting like a desperate slave. These are advanced psychological skill sets, granted. The initial phase of building this sovereign power feels intensely uncomfortable. Strip away the constant distraction of dating, and you are forced to sit face to face with your raw emotions. You must learn how to digest your own darkest thoughts in real time and confront your deepest insecurities without running to a validation source for a quick fix. But this internal friction is the exact weights required to grow your spirit. You begin to notice a profound truth. Your emotional waves have a 100 expiration rate. Anxiety ignites, peaks frantically, and inevitably dies down. Loneliness surfaces, lingers for an evening, and fades away into peace. Doubt crawls into your mind and eventually recedes. When you stand as a calm, objective witness to these internal tides, you unlock the ultimate realization. You are not your emotions, you are the vast, silent consciousness that is observing them. This epiphany fundamentally alters how you operate. Instead of being a hostage to how you feel on any given morning, you begin to respond to life from a position of conscious power. Instead of automatically flinching at every emotional trigger, you pause, take a deep breath, and choose your response. Achieving emotional sovereignty also means you permanently lose the ability to negotiate your mental peace just to keep a body in your life. It is tragic how many individuals tolerate horrific disrespect, gaslighting, and emotional neglect simply because they are terrified of sleeping in an empty house. They accept horrific inconsistency because their souls are starving for connection, and they systematically silence their own non-negotiable needs just to avoid an argument. Over the years, they shrink their grand personalities into a tiny box just to keep a toxic attachment alive. But when you have spent a long season standing alone, fortifying your independent castle, you lose all willingness to accept chaos in exchange for superficial company. You begin to value quiet, steady calmness infinitely more than loud, dramatic excitement. You choose absolute stability over exhausting relationship drama, and you will walk away from any dynamic that threatens your mental clarity. This shift doesn't transform you into a cold, detached cynic. It anchors you as a deeply grounded individual. You comprehend with absolute certainty that a romantic partnership should solely function to enhance your existing peace, not continuously disrupt it. You recognize that authentic connection must feel like a safe harbor, not a chaotic storm. And you become intensely selective because you hold your psychological well-being as a sacred boundary. True wisdom lies in the middle path, state of perfect equilibrium that avoids extreme codependency on one side and defensive hyperindependence on the other. Emotional sovereignty is the perfect embodiment of this balance. You are entirely free from needing a partner for happiness, yet your heart remains completely open to high-vibrational love. You retain the capacity to love another human being with the absolute entirety of your soul without ever losing your self-identity in the process. You can connect deeply while keeping your boundaries intact. Walking single grants you the uninterrupted years required to refine this internal balance. You learn your psychological triggers inside out without pointing fingers at an outsider. Review your behavioral history with radical honesty and install healthier cognitive responses. You train your nervous system to look at absolute uncertainty and feel entirely calm. Over time, your trust in your own soul becomes absolute. You trust that even if the love of your life walks out tomorrow, your internal foundation will remain perfectly unmoved. You trust that even if your grandest life plans fracture, you possess the innate power to adapt and conquer. You know your peace is not a fragile glass ornament, but a titanium fortress. This deep self-trust completely purges all fear from your relationships. When you are emotionally sovereign, you never cling to people out of anxiety, you select them out of absolute freedom. You don't spiral into panic at the thought of loss, because you know you are fully capable of surviving it. You are no longer controlled by the desperate need to be chosen by the world, because you have already chosen the soul in the mirror. A quiet, magnetic aura of confidence radiates from this level of internal strength. It is completely devoid of loud bravado or arrogant boasting. It is remarkably steady and calm. You walk with a different posture, speak with a grounded cadence, and completely stop over-explaining your boundaries to people. You refuse to chase validation, because your validation is entirely self-generated. This confidence stems from the absolute certainty that your inner world is stable, your happiness is an inside job, and your human worth is completely independent of public opinion. Singleness is never about avoiding romance. Its true purpose is to fortify your spirit, so that when love finally presents itself, it encounters an absolute titan. It is about ensuring your identity remains bulletproof inside a relationship, and treating your peace of mind as a non-negotiable boundary. When you step into absolute emotional sovereignty, you permanently stop asking, will they choose to stay? And start asking, does their presence align with my sacred peace? That psychological pivot changes everything. It obliterates desperation, purges anxiety, and replaces fragile insecurity with elite discernment. In the grand scheme of your life, taking the time to master emotional sovereignty is never a loss. It is your greatest personal compounding event. It is the season where you master your own mind, fortify your boundaries, and discover that your peace is yours alone to defend. And once you taste the ecstasy of that unshakable internal stability, you will never again compromise it in exchange for temporary affection. That is true freedom. That is real maturity. That is the ultimate spiritual advantage of staying single long enough to become the calm, immovable center of your own universe. If you currently find yourself walking the single path, look at your life through a new lens. Refuse to view it as a void, refuse to recontextualize it as a delay, and refuse to see it as a rejection. Embrace it as an elite process of refinement. This chapter is not a punishment from the universe. It is a sacred gift designed to fortify your spirit. It is here to ruthlessly strip away your illusions and force your deepest fears into the light so you can finally heal them. It is here to train your nervous system to master patience in a modern world addicted to frantic speed. It is here to show you that true peace never begins when another person takes your hand. It begins the exact moment you permanently stop running from your own soul. The masses rush into romance because they are utterly terrified of the silence. They run into toxic commitments because they lack the courage to face their own minds. They chase superficial connections because they cannot sit with the fire of desire. But you have chosen a radically different path. You have prioritized profound growth over cheap comfort, crystalline clarity over comfortable fantasy, and fierce discipline over desperate starvation. Walking single is not a rejection of romance. It is the vital preparation required to experience it properly. It is about constructing an emotional foundation so rock-solid that you will never again demand a partner rescue you from your own internal storms. It is about becoming so grounded that absolutely no one can ever manipulate your choices through the threat of abandonment, and becoming so self-aware that you perceive love with absolute clarity, stripped of all fairy tales. Look at what you have built. You have learned the art of honest self-confrontation. You have mastered the monumental boundary between toxic attachment and true love. You have redirected your finite energy away from relationship chaos and funneled it directly into your personal empire. You have dismantled the primal terror of loneliness, forged an internal source of validation, and learned to manifest from a position of absolute overflow. You have awakened to the truth that you were never incomplete, built an unbreakable alliance with your own soul, purged illusions from your vision, stepped onto your highest destiny timeline, mastered your desire, and achieved absolute emotional sovereignty. This is the definition of power. There is an incredible, magnetic strength in a human being who can exist in absolute solitude and feel entirely at peace. There is a rare anomaly in someone who remains perfectly calm when they are not selected by the room. There is something intensely attractive about a person who is entirely whole before they ever look for romance. And here is the ultimate truth that the masses are too terrified to accept. The exact moment you no longer need love to survive is the exact moment you are finally ready to experience it. Because authentic love should always be a sovereign choice, never a frantic rescue mission. It should function as high-vibrational companionship, never a codependent quest for completion. It should feel like two sovereign, stable minds walking side by side in absolute freedom, not two broken hearts trying to fix each other's trauma. So stand in your singleness until you are completely unshakable. Inhabit your solitude until you are deeply in love with your own presence. Protect your internal peace infinitely more than your ego, and continue to build an independent life that is completely rich, full, and vibrant all by itself. And if love eventually enters your world down the line, ensure it enters gently. Demand that it complement your existence. Never define your worth. Let it walk beside you as an equal. Never carry you as a burden. Let it exist as a beautiful blessing, never an addictive necessity. Until that day manifests, continue to evolve, continue to heal, continue to fortify your consciousness, and continue to ruthlessly choose your own soul. Because the absolute greatest spiritual advantage of being single is this: you finally awaken to the earth-shattering realization that you were never waiting for an outsider to complete your story. You were simply preparing your spirit to meet yourself.